What's up, YouTube? Got a new role to look at today, but unlike the others, I'm not in this one. Well, I'm behind the camera, and that doesn't count. So I've trained with Dan and Marcos for a couple years now, so even though I cannot read minds yet, I should be able to at least talk about what moves they're trying to go for. So let me know if this is entertaining enough, and I'll continue this series and maybe make a few more of these types of videos. All right, let's get started.
Already done.
You like
That's
that?
what I'm gonna get.
Good for me.
Throw.
Everybody has problem in life. That's yours now.
And then push it down.
So Dan pulls guard immediately, and notice how he goes for this lapel and ankle grip, right? And he's trying to hook his feet on to the hip and behind the knee. So look at one more time how he pulls guard, right?
And then
He's engaging his hands high, and then he fishes the lapel with two hands as he pulls. One advantage of grabbing the lapel over the sleeve is the lapel grip is a lot harder to break. And the other advantage is that by hanging on the lapel and sitting to guard like a rope, Marcos has to stay close to him, right? Even if he jumps his legs back, the lapel will still be attached to Dan. And it controls his posture a little bit, right? Because the lapel goes around his neck. Let's look at what Dan tries to do with this lapel grip. Nice. He uses the lapel to square up, and notice how he goes for this double ankle sweep. Nice. He immediately comes up. And notice how Marcos is just chilling, right? He has no grip here, no grip with the other hand. He's just framing to see what Dan's going to do. And this is the last roll of a bunch of rolls we did today. So it's understandable if these guys are a bit tired. Dan tries to pass, and he lands right inside this triangle. So look at how Marcos sets that up again. Dan goes two hands to pin this knee and tries to circle. Marcos frames the outside hand, and when Dan tries to switch directions, notice how Marcos shoots that leg over his head to block him. And as Dan squares back up and brings his head in, he's caught in this triangle because his other hand is posting on the ground. This is a big problem. So immediately Dan is keeping his posture up and pulling this knee down to avoid getting his posture compromised even further with this triangle lock that Marcos has. Marcos goes for this 2-on-1 grip on this arm inside the triangle, making it even harder for Dan to try to stack this way or stack that way, right? The two main triangle escapes are bringing your both shoulders inside the lock and stacking to the side. Again, Dan's trying to pull that leg down. Marcos's legs are super strong though, and I think he just chills out for a bit. Notice here how he's bringing his head down, right? Somebody might think that, oh, this is a mistake. Dan's giving up his posture, but actually by bringing his head down, he's going to try to drive both his shoulders through the lock to give more breathing room to himself. Marcos lets go of the triangle at this point, probably because he knows the roll will be over if he just held onto it, and he wants to see what Dan's going to do. And also because he knows he's on camera, so it's better to have more interesting things happen. Dan's stuck in the closed guard, right? He's framing on the hips, trying to scoot his hip back, and notice how he has one knee out and one knee right in between. You can't see. He's going to try to use that to pop the guard open. Right here, Marcos jumps his hips back right between Dan's knees again, denying Dan this guard break. Dan immediately goes right back to it. He's posting here with the two hands, and notice how Marcos is now picking up his famous double sleeve grips. Even though Marcos's feet are open here, I don't know if Dan is able to tell, because even though his feet are open, Marcos is pinching inwards with his legs to give the impression that he's still locked in the guard. Dan manages to stand, and he starts circling, right? He's trying to get this foot off of his hip. He wants it between his legs. Marcos is doing a really good job pulling his sleeves, framing the hips, and Dan's going to be stuck here for a bit. Notice again how Dan's posture is very forwards here, right? His head is low, his sleeves are controlled, and his legs are very far back. By keeping his legs back, he's denying Marcos the ability to grip his pants, but Marcos does have these two sleeves. I think if he wanted to, he could go straight to a bunch of submissions. Dan's still circling. So Marcos feeds in this the rear leg to like a butterfly hook kind of deal. Look how Marcos takes that leg off his hip, and right here he feeds that in between, inside the thigh. He's still framing with this foot on the hip as Dan is circling. And with the double sleeve control, I think there's a sweep coming up real soon. Look how the knee is bent. He's going to probably use that as a sort of a butterfly deal. He goes to this shallow lasso, right, by putting the foot over onto Dan's shoulder. And let's see what Dan does with this. Dan is keeping one knee up, one knee down, right? This denies Marcos the ability to close his close guard, right? He can't lock it if the knee's stuck there. But with the lasso in, he still has an effective guard. Dan is again trying to clear the knee out of the way. I think he was thinking of going in for a knee cut out to his right. But Marcos is, oh, look how he puts in that deep De La Riva hook right all the way through to the far hip. Underneath that knee that is up. He leans to the side while controlling both sleeves, and Dan falls to his hip. At this point, personally, I'd be thinking about getting both my feet out, right? I don't want to get my feet tangled up while Marcos has this deep De La Riva underneath my knee. But I think Dan's tired enough that he's just thinking about staying on his hip, getting his hands free, and oh look, there's a leg in my lap. Maybe I should attack it. Look how he untangles his foot, immediately grabs Marcos's foot, and starts trying to lock up something on this free leg. I think part of his confidence comes from seeing that his posture, or let me move back a bit. Part of his confidence comes from seeing how his posture is a little bit higher than Marcos. See how Marcos is on his hip here and Dan is kind of sitting on his butt. And Dan sees this juicy looking foot in front of him. Maybe I'll take it home. Notice how Marcos is keeping this grip on the sleeve, right? Without two hands to attack the foot, Marcos is able to stay safe. And with this super tight grip, Dan is unable to use both hands to attack. Marcos lets go to let him move, right? He knows he could hold him there for 5, 10, 20 minutes if he wanted. Dan stands up to try to pass, and again, look at what he's controlling, right? When he stands up, notice how his hands immediately go to this bottom leg here. He stands, his hands are free, and he starts thinking about which way to pass. He's trying to push this leg out of the way as he circles to that side. Marcos sees him, so his hands are already up framing. Dan is running this way. Marcos immediately has his frames in. And at this point, if Dan settles, he'll be on north-south. Marcos knows this, so this bottom foot, notice how it's on the ground. It's going to scoot in. He's going to bring his legs in and his head out. Dan is trying to settle in the north-south position, but Marcos still has his frames in, right? He has this frame in, and I think the bottom arm is also framing the knee. So look how he's turning, and let's look at that one more time. Notice how he scoots in and catches Dan's legs with his leg. He does a forward hip escape to off-balance Dan, and as Dan posts here with his hand, his feet are light, which allows Marcos to scoot in and grab it. Dan's going for like a headlock here. He is over this shoulder and in front of this one. And he's going to try to sprawl his legs back to try to get rid of this grip. But Marcos is already super deep here. And notice how he's going with this lapel grip, right? He's not going two hands to the leg. He's going one on the leg, one on the lapel. He passes the lapel through to his other hand. And so now Marcos has that leg and the lapel. This is a super tight grip that is extremely difficult to sprawl out of. And also, if Dan really wanted to sprawl out of this, he would do well to switch this overhook. He would do well to switch this underhook for an overhook, right? But at this point, Marcos is already way too deep on the leg that it wouldn't make sense for him to let go of this to go back in front of this arm. Yeah, you can see he was thinking about it, right? He moved his hand there, but he felt that Marcos is already too tight, so he didn't commit more energy to that. Marcos goes for this far leg with his other hand. Now that he's got the lapel locked in with his right hand, his left hand is going to pick up this leg, and I think he's going to be thinking about driving that way, right? He has his head on Dan's hip. You can see he's moving his legs in. Dan's thinking about trapping this leg, right? If he can pull this leg with his hand, Marcos hopefully won't have enough leverage to drive him over that way. Let's look at what happens. He just picks him up straight away. Now, when you're in this position, right, when someone picks you up by the legs and your head is over their back, I've seen people try to lock up a triangle right here, right? If Dan circles this leg around and traps this head and this arm, he could potentially have a rear triangle, rear inverted triangle, whatever that's called. But notice how Marcos immediately grips this leg with his arm after he picks up Dan, right? He's denying any sort of possible counterattack that could come his way. Look, he picks him up. He posts with his hand to gain height with his knees. And immediately, look how he's scooping this leg. So now he has both legs controlled, and he has Dan's weight all the way behind him. Dan has no connection with the ground here. He's trying to hold on to something. But with no connection to the ground and no useful grips for him, he's kind of at the mercy of whatever Marcos wants to do. Look how he's holding on to something to keep himself attached. But he's just kind of chilling. I'm watching the timer tick by and trying to see what's going on, and nothing really is happening, so I'm going to slowly circle around to the front to see what Marcos is thinking. I think he's just waiting to see what Dan's going to do from here. Dan's kind of playing dead. Look how he's not really advancing his grips or moving his legs at all. Marcos pulls one leg down, and Dan immediately plants that foot, right? He needs to get that connection with the ground, and he's using that foot as a butterfly hook as he sits back. Right, he's kind of in like a half butterfly position. And he goes to this double collar grip. Notice how Marcos is maintaining that grip on the leg. Oh, he let go. Nice. So that was I think a butterfly sweep he was going for, right? He has one hook in, one hook out, and this he's going to this double collar grip. Right, this double collar, it's useful for one thing, right? Pulling backwards. So with two collars, he can really pull Marcos over him as he tries to scoot under. So look how he does this big pull, but he only has one butterfly hook there. He manages to elevate Marcos. Marcos is posting with this hand you can't see. And immediately Dan is underhooking this leg that he managed to elevate and tries to scoot under. Even though he has this leg scooped and this leg is disconnected from the ground, look how Marcos is posting on his knee and his hand to maintain height, right? He knows that if his head drops too low, Dan will be able to come up on top. But by maintaining these two posts, he's keeping height and denying the butterfly sweep. Marcos is switching to use his head as a post because he wants his hand free to pick up this leg, right? Dan had one butterfly hook in here, and his other leg was just kind of dangling on the outside. Dan is thinking about pushing this knee out and coming up into a sweep, right? He has this leg controlled. Let's look at what Marcos does to deal with this. Dan switches to an outside position. I think it's, yeah, look how he has this underhook here. He's going to pummel this leg around to the outside, right? He's thinking, oh, I'm going to attack this leg. And he rolls straight through. Marcos rolls again to deny that knee bar, right? Look at this one more time. As Dan throws his leg this way, Marcos's knee is facing into Dan's stomach, right? Right here. Look, if Dan at this point continues that rotation, he can attack a knee bar. Marcos knows this, so as Dan rolls, he's going to follow him. Look how Dan's going for this knee bar here. Right? He's facing his belly down, facing into that knee. And as he tries to get torque on it, Marcos is twisting and following him, right? He's trying to free his knee. Now the knee is pointed up. Notice how his leg is like this, right? With the knee pointed up, there's no more knee bar. But now, as Dan went for the knee bar, he ended up on bottom, right? He committed on the attack. Marcos defended, and now Marcos is on top. And look how he's wrapping up this foot. I think he has a collar grip. No. Yeah, he's going for this collar grip, and that collar grip is a good sign, or a good way to tell that he's going to go for this straight ankle lock here. He switches his hand. He brings his inside of hand through, making it even tighter. Dan is immediately trying to go for some sort of a collar grip here, right? If he can pull the collar towards him, he can prevent Marcos from hipping out and arching his back and taking pressure off of the lock. At this point, Marcos is squeezing way too tight. You can notice Dan taps right away. Let's look at that straight ankle lock setup one more time. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Marcos defends the knee bar. Dan's still thinking about attacking this foot. And notice how his other foot's just kind of dangling here, right? Maybe he's framing into him. Maybe he's not thinking about this foot, but Marcos takes the opportunity to wrap this up with his free hand. And he brings his other leg around to trap that leg, right? Whenever you see someone putting both their feet or both their legs around your one leg, you know that leg could be attacked. So Marcos makes it look like he's going for this outside grip. So Dan controls his hand here. And immediately Marcos brings his other hand through. This is an even tighter variation of that straight ankle lock. Dan's going for whatever grip he can, but at this point, it's already kind of too late. Marcos gets a quick tap out of Dan. He tells him to keep going though. Pretend it never happened. Dan goes to his feet, right? If he's up on his feet, it's much harder for Marcos to finish this footlock. He builds height. Comes up to both feet. And he tries to step this leg through. Marcos is wise to this, and his foot is hooked. Notice how he's hooked on the inside of Dan's knee, which lets him follow, right? Even as Dan is trying to, I think it's like a back step he's trying to do. Notice how he stands up. And he tries to back step that leg free, right? Marcos can kind of see this, and he's keeping this leg hooked here. And he follows Dan as he backsteps straight into another footlock. Right. This one's even nastier though, as Marcos can go belly down into the foot. He adds a tremendous amount of braking pressure, to borrow the famous Dan-Hur verbiage. Look at Dan's face here. He's not having a good time. He gets a quick tap. Marcos could probably rip that foot off if he wanted to.
You still have no energy left.
I have it for man.
Marcos is laughing that Dan complained he was tired, but he's still trying to rip off his coach's foot through that roll.
Yeah, McKinnon.
So I hope that was entertaining for you guys. I don't know if I'll do more of these videos because it's kind of hard to watch other people getting beat up. I'd rather you guys see me getting beat up than other people, but it is what it is. If you guys enjoy this, please leave a comment, leave a like, and maybe think about subscribing. I'll have more content out. I'm putting out multiple videos a week, so stay tuned. Thanks, guys.